In the last few days, Labour MPs in the United Kingdom have been urging the government to push forward with the implementation of a national digital ID system. The rationale, according to proponents, is that digital identification could streamline access to public services, curb illegal work and under-the-table employment, and increase administrative efficiency across sectors such as healthcare, welfare, and immigration. However, the push for digital ID has sparked intense debate across political lines, with civil liberties groups, digital rights advocates, and concerned citizens warning of the deep and potentially irreversible consequences such a system could have on privacy and freedom. Labour MPs have framed digital ID as a practical solution to several modern problems. They argue that an official, standardised form of identification would simplify interactions with services such as the NHS, reduce fraud in the benefits system, and help authorities tackle irregular migration and black market employment. In a time of growing pressure on public institutions and resources, many believe that a digital ID system could serve as a foundation for smarter governance and accountability. Yet critics argue that this line of thinking conceals more than it reveals. While the administrative benefits of digital ID may sound appealing on the surface, the implications of establishing such a system go far deeper. Many have accused lawmakers of using crises, such as migration issues or welfare fraud, as convenient justifications to introduce systems that pose a long-term threat to civil liberties. The concern is that, rather than solving the problems that arise from government mismanagement, digital ID systems merely shift the burden onto ordinary citizens by asking them to give up privacy in exchange for access. Privacy campaigners, particularly those associated with organizations like Big Brother Watch, have voiced significant concerns. They argue that the creation of a central digital ID system, combined with the power of modern data analytics and facial recognition, opens the door to a kind of surveillance infrastructure that would be difficult, if not impossible, to dismantle once implemented. These groups have warned that digital IDs could be misused for mass tracking, profiling, or targeting of specific groups. While advocates of digital ID speak of efficiency and fraud prevention, critics caution that the true cost could be the erosion of anonymous access to essential services and the normalization of constant surveillance. The concern is not limited to the UK. Around the world, the introduction of digital ID systems has been accompanied by similar fears. In countries like India, where the Aadhaar system has been implemented on a national scale, reports have emerged about exclusion errors, data breaches, and misuse of biometric information. For many observers, the lesson is clear. Once governments and private companies begin collecting and storing deeply personal data on a large scale, the risks of abuse or misuse multiply rapidly. Activists warn that digital ID could eventually become a gateway to more invasive forms of control, such as digital wallets linked to personal behavior, social credit systems, or biometric tracking that monitors not just what people do, but how they do it. The potential for government overreach is enormous, especially in times of crisis, when emergency laws and surveillance measures are often introduced with little debate and weak oversight. Digital rights groups argue that introducing digital ID cards during a time of public anxiety, whether it be over migration, economic instability, or healthcare, creates a false dichotomy, that one must either give up their privacy or forgo public services. Instead of addressing systemic issues with transparency, funding, and reform, governments may increasingly rely on technological tools to create the illusion of control, while fundamentally altering the relationship between the state and the individual. Adding to these fears is the fact that much of the infrastructure underpinning digital ID systems is developed and maintained by private corporations. This raises crucial questions about data sovereignty, oversight, and long-term accountability. When data collection, storage, and analysis are outsourced to companies whose primary motivation is profit, the risk of exploitation rises dramatically. Private actors are not held to the same democratic standards as public institutions, yet they may be granted unprecedented access to sensitive data that can be used to predict, manipulate, or control behavior. Over the last decade, whistleblowers, journalists, and privacy experts have helped reveal just how pervasive surveillance technologies have become. Revelations from former intelligence contractor Edward Snowden showed that agencies such as the NSA and government communications headquarters were collecting bulk data on citizens without warrants or public knowledge. These disclosures prompted global outrage and forced governments to confront the vast, shadowy reach of their intelligence operations. And yet, as the memory of these revelations fades, the infrastructure of surveillance continues to grow, now augmented by artificial intelligence, biometrics, and predictive analytics. Within this context, the call for a digital ID is not just a policy debate, it is a civil liberties issue of enormous significance. The risk is that once digital ID becomes normalized, other invasive technologies may follow. Governments could begin linking these IDs to financial systems, medical histories, travel records, and social media profiles. What begins as a tool for convenience and efficiency could morph into a tool for control and coercion. Some citizens worry that digital ID systems could be used to block or restrict access to services for dissenters, protesters, or vulnerable populations. The fear is that once everyone's data is centralized and their identity digitized, the barriers to authoritarian policies shrink. While many believe such scenarios are unlikely in democratic societies, history offers numerous examples of governments turning on their citizens in moments of crisis or instability. These fears are not unfounded. From China's social credit system to facial recognition programs in the United States and United Kingdom, there is a growing body of evidence that governments are increasingly using technology not just to serve citizens, but to monitor them. When governments control who can access basic services or participate in public life based on a digital profile, the result is a fundamental reshaping of democracy. As a response, privacy advocates are calling for greater transparency, stricter data protection laws, and a renewed emphasis on informed consent. They argue that any attempt to introduce a digital ID system must come with strong legal safeguards, independent oversight, and mechanisms for redress. It is not enough to promise that data will be protected. There must be enforceable rules that prevent abuse and empower citizens to challenge overreach. Legislators must also contend with the fact that many people simply do not trust governments or corporations to handle their data responsibly. Years of high-profile data breaches, algorithmic bias, and government surveillance have eroded public confidence. Any move to introduce digital IDs must acknowledge this trust deficit and work to rebuild credibility through open dialogue and genuine engagement. In response to growing concern, some jurisdictions have taken steps to limit the use of digital ID technologies. A number of cities in the United States have passed laws restricting the use of facial recognition by police and other public agencies. Some European countries have introduced stringent data protection laws under the General Data Protection Regulation, which emphasizes consent, transparency, and the right to be forgotten. But even with these safeguards, critics argue that the very existence of a centralized digital ID system poses risks that may be impossible to fully mitigate. Once such systems are embedded in public life, rolling them back becomes difficult, if not impossible. Just as surveillance cameras have become ubiquitous in urban environments, digital IDs could become a permanent fixture of modern life, with all the risks that entails. Public awareness and education are critical in shaping the future of digital identity. Citizens must understand what is at stake, not just in terms of convenience or efficiency, but in terms of privacy, autonomy, and democracy. If digital IDs are to be introduced, they must be subject to democratic debate, robust oversight, and clear limitations on use. There's also a growing fear surrounding facial recognition technology that is no longer confined to fringe discussions among privacy advocates or tech skeptics. It has now entered mainstream discourse, sparking serious concerns from both citizens and civil liberties organizations. What was once heralded as an innovation designed to enhance security, convenience, and personalization is now increasingly viewed as a tool capable of undermining privacy, free speech, and democratic norms. While much of the public focus has been directed at private sector startups aggressively harvesting biometric data from social media and public sources, there is a deeper and more troubling concern brewing in the background: the potential, or perhaps the reality, of government agencies quietly adopting these technologies, thereby extending the reach of state surveillance under the guise of safety and national interest. The fear isn't hypothetical. History has repeatedly shown that the gap between private innovation and public power is often narrow when it comes to surveillance. Technologies developed for commercial use are quickly adopted by governments, frequently without transparency or public oversight. With facial recognition software, This dynamic becomes particularly alarming. Many believe that governments, both domestic and abroad, either already have access to these systems or are quietly acquiring and integrating them into existing surveillance infrastructures. This possibility raises significant ethical and legal questions. If private companies can scrape data and build facial databases using online content without user consent, what safeguards exist to prevent governments from doing the same, either through direct partnerships or covert acquisitions? Past revelations about global surveillance programs lend credibility to these fears. Programs revealed by whistleblowers over the past decade have shown that governments, often in collaboration with tech giants, have amassed vast troves of metadata, emails, call records, and even personal images. These collections were justified under broad national security claims, yet many were conducted without meaningful oversight. The concern now is that facial recognition could follow a similar path, becoming a central tool in monitoring individuals' movements, expressions, and associations, without warrants, transparency, or accountability. One of the most alarming potential uses of facial recognition by the state involves tracking attendees at peaceful protests or political rallies. There is growing evidence that surveillance tools have already been deployed in such contexts. Identifying individuals in crowds, compiling lists of attendees, and monitoring the behavior of politically active citizens could become the norm, especially during times of civil unrest. Such capabilities would have a chilling effect on freedom of speech and assembly.